In my last video, I explored a strange anomaly from the time of vanilla WoW, a cave within the mountains of Morogh that once allowed players to communicate in the chat channels of Silithus despite the two zones being on different continents. Since then, I have received a lot of great feedback and tips regarding other examples of this same bug, and today I want to explore those as well. Some of these cases I would have never expected to exist in the game, and I really appreciate all of you who gave input and pointed me in these new directions. Thank you all for the fun comments and support, and with all that being said, let's get right into it. I want to start by briefly re-explaining why this type of glitch happened in vanilla WoW all the way up until the end of Wrath of the Lich King. Many structures in the game, including places like mines and caves, are stored separately from the regular map terrain. These locations are separate files called WMOs, or World Map Objects, which are especially useful when modeling more intricate features than what the terrain editor can do on its own. Caves, for example, can guide your character deep underground or inside a mountain because a hole has been punched in the base terrain and the tunnel entrance is installed there. Every WMO has properties stored in the database, including a zone ID property that tells the game what zone the feature is located in. For example, when you walk off of the Elwynn Forest terrain and inside the Lion's Pride Inn, the zone ID helps the game keep track of your position so it knows, yeah, this player is still within the Elwynn Forest zone. And the corresponding chat channels and other settings are maintained as well. However, if, for instance, a cave in Silithus was duplicated and added in as scenery within Morogh without updating the zone ID, then the player would register as being in Silithus while standing inside the cave. This is the case I covered in my previous video. I would also like to reiterate that this bug was fixed with the launch of Cataclysm when the entire zone ID property was reworked, fixing all examples of the bug at once, or at least the ones caused by this specific mismatch. Classic WoW also uses this updated architecture, meaning it no longer exists in any version of the live game. But for today's video, we can still use an original vanilla, TBC, or Wrath server like the one I have access to explore these long-lost details. Let's return to Ortel's hideout, or rather the copy of it in Morogh. By far the most popular question on the last video was, where would you respawn if you died in the cave? And here's your answer. Yep, Silithus. So perhaps some clever players long ago used this cave as a method of teleportation if they were willing to pay with some resurrection sickness. It turns out this is not the only copy of Ortel's hideout ever made, though the other is much harder to access. Inside the Zul'Gurub raid instance, players can glitch outside the Troll City and travel around a barren Stranglethorn Vale. In the mirrored version of the ruins of Zul'Mamwe to the south, the cave here exhibits the same strange properties, changing zones, chat channels, and yes, the corresponding graveyard as well. In the open world, this cave's properties must have been corrected before launch, but the version that was copied inside the instance was probably forgotten about. Now this would definitely be the ultimate prank for someone pretending to be in Silithus all the way from an instanced version of Stranglethorn Vale. According to your comments, the most well-known example of this bug could be found in Winterspring, and somehow I had never even heard of it. Entering the cave where the High Chief resides switches your zone ID to Alterac Valley. Not the Alterac Mountains, but the Alterac Valley Battleground, the massive 40v40 PvP zone. According to one comment on my last video, this oversight happened because Winterspring was still being polished even as the game was being rolled out, and in their haste to develop this zone, the devs forgot to switch the ID of this cave. I wasn't able to test this on my client, but with many copies of the Battleground running at the same time back in vanilla, my guess is that the chat channels are differentiated inside each PvP round, meaning you probably aren't able to communicate with other players from here. But I could be wrong. Dying here turned out to be a very interesting experiment. Since I wasn't actually enrolled in a PvP match when this happened, the game kicked me out of what was supposed to be Alterac Valley, and instead brought my ghost to the Horde Tunnel where the instance portal is located. So next time you need to teleport from Winterspring to Lordaeron quickly, here's your ticket. But no matter what spirit healer you visit from here, you actually end up getting sent right back to the tunnel entrance on spawn, making for a messy transition if you're an Alliance player. There is also a very similar instance with a duplicated Frostwolf Keep found out of bounds in Blackwing Lair, but players who die here are sent to the Alliance tunnel entrance instead. Yet another odd detail, but one that probably very few players have ever found. I've saved my personal favorite for last, a complex case that only existed during the original Wrath of the Lich King time period from 2008 to 2010. In southwestern Hillsbrad foothills, players might come across the Azure Lode Mine, an expansive cave where the Alliance gathers precious ore for their nearby townships. You might recall this spot, and it's perfectly normal as far as I know, but did you know there exists a copy of it? Venturing into the time travel version of the zone inside the Caverns of Time, glitching out of bounds lets you get right back to the same spot. But something is different. Entering doesn't keep your zone ID in the old Hillsbrad foothills, and it doesn't even swap it back to the regular Hillsbrad foothills. Instead, the game lists you as being inside the Winterguard Mine in Dragonblight, all the way up in Northrend. Somehow this mine, in a Burning Crusade dungeon from 2007, registers the same as a mine out in the open world that didn't even exist until 2008. But why? There are a few order of operations that could explain this phenomenon, but somehow the Dragonblight Zone ID was added to this WMO, likely before it was copied and shipped up north. And yes, dying here does teleport you to Dragonblight, a very unusual warp that bridges these two expansions, but one that I had a lot of fun investigating. There were a few other instances of this type of bug that affected various locations in the early days of vanilla, but since they were patched early on, there's not a lot of history or documentation on them apart from old player legends, but who knows, maybe there are others that still exist, hidden away in the far corners of the world. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, may the Force be with you.